Okay, so this training will cover how the coordinated entry, coordinated assessment process goes in York County, because York County is different from Adams County, just by a little bit. We're trying to mimic as much as we can. So in York County, the coordinated entry, coordinated assessment process is called Pathways to Home. That's just the name of it. We use all three terms interchangeably for better or worse, but that's kind of how we handle it. And I have a couple of slides to talk about just background on coordinated entry. And then we will actually skip out of the PowerPoint and talk about forms, because the final part of the PowerPoint is all about using the homeless management information system to track your assessments. And because you guys are with a victim service provider, you won't be doing that process. So we're going to kind of segue to forms and talk about forms. Okay. So a really basic overview for those that don't have a ton of coordinated entry experience. Coordinated entry is a community-wide assessment and referral process. It limits people's opportunity or realities of having to go to multiple different housing agencies to fill out multiple different but slightly similar intake packets for each program in order to get on a wait list for that particular agency. It allows us to do a single wait list. And in York County, that is only for permanent housing options, things like rapid rehousing. We do have a transitional housing, rapid rehousing project on there for youth, permanent supportive housing, those types of activities. We in York County do not do coordinated entry for emergency shelter or transitional housing outside of that youth transitional housing rapid rehousing project. So this allows us to do our prioritized wait list. We do use the VI SPDAT in York County. We would love to get away from it. Working on it, but not there yet. And probably the best part that we prefer about coordinated entry is that we've gotten away from first come, first serve. We have a long history of people knowing when specific projects open and planning to take advantage of those projects. And so the thing that we probably like the most about coordinated entry is kind of removing that element of it. We also really love that it allows us to refer people to what at least appears to be an appropriate housing type or an appropriate housing program, instead of people just taking whatever they can get, knowing that it's not enough to stabilize their situation. So we do love those parts of coordinated entry. However, prioritizing by need does mean that you end up working with potentially more challenging households than you would doing first come, first serve. But that's kind of how we handle it. It does kind of drop down the duplication, and it makes us aware of what a true wait list looks like, instead of each individual agency having a wait list of hundreds of people, when in reality that wait list never gets cleaned out, and that's why there are hundreds of people on it. So we do enjoy those pieces of coordinated entry. Without coordinated entry in York County, we did find that locating and getting accepted to housing programs was a very slow process. It was very time consuming for clients and consumers. They had to go to every housing agency and getting every wait list. Lots of duplication. So everybody was shouting about how many people they had on their wait list, but the reality was the wait lists were heavily duplicated. And we actually found that because those wait lists by agency weren't being cleaned out appropriately and people weren't touching base with those on the wait list, that we actually had units and housing opportunities sitting empty longer because it took us a really long time to locate people. We were able to cut down those things with coordinated entry. And we also found that no one was really asking people what their needs were and what challenges they were currently going through. They were just doing intake packets. They were collecting information that people needed for their funders, but not necessarily sitting down with the household and asking what they felt their challenges were and what they felt the things that they had going really well for them in that current moment were. They were just like, oh, fill out all of this demographic information on your family. So we do love, as I mentioned, with coordinated entry, that we're able to try to suggest referrals of housing programs to households based on some of those needs questions. It allows us to say like, hey, we really would like to see you take advantage of a program that has a little bit longer amount of assistance to give you enough time to feel like you're steady in your housing before you move on. It also allows us to take those folks that we don't think need that long and say, I really think a shorter program is going to be enough for you. Obviously, the client gets to say no, and we will absolutely put them back on our list and try to find them another solution. But we also can't guarantee that they will get what they're looking for. So that's always a bit of a challenge. We also love that we're now asking everybody the same questions. So we're getting the same kind of objective assessment for everyone who's looking for housing. I won't pretend that the VI SPDAT is the best or even, mid-pack on how we ask questions. We recognize it's not particularly trauma informed, but for now it's what we have to use, and we are looking for ways to create a local assessment instead. It does decrease our amount of time to house consumers, not only because we often have a lot of consumers touching these clients individually, and so we have a pretty good handle on where they are in the system and what's happening with their situation, but also we cap our coordinated entry at 60 days. So after 60 days, we're looking for people to either be reassessed or we're assuming that they've moved on to another alternative. So it never becomes a matter of spending a month trying to find someone. We're pretty quick on our turnaround if we're unable to locate people. It has decreased our amount of time to house consumers because most of the assessments are pretty fresh, and so it's easy to connect with people and move forward with them. It has also had a lot of collaboration between our providers. They work more closely now, I think, than they ever have, because agency A might do the assessment, but agency B might actually be the housing program they work with. And what we found is that the assessment agency is happy to step in and share information. They're happy to step in and do a warm handoff if that's appropriate, if the client has a relationship with them already. So those kinds of things have made it a little bit more streamlined as well. In York County, our primary focus for coordinated entry are Continuum of Care and Emergency Solutions Grant, COC and ESG funded projects. We do have a handful of others that participate in the process. We are hoping to hire a staff person within our office to spend a little bit more time dedicated to doing coordinated entry to try to grow that and try to bring a few new projects on. And then, of course, for most of our assessments, we're using HMIS, which is really kind of heavily coordinated what we have available. Just for reference, we know that the YW cannot use HMIS because you are a victim service provider. What I'm less clear on is whether or not I can provide access, for example, to Sarah or to Amy, to be able to review what is in HMIS, which might be helpful if you're accepting referrals for your housing project that were assessed by another agency. So I'm still waiting for some feedback on that, but I'm happy to provide it if it seems to be helpful. We just would not have you guys entering anything in that system. So this is not the greatest flow chart, but it's what we have, and so it's what we use. Just to give you an idea of how this kind of looks in practice in York County for most of our folks. Our little green guy is where we start. If a client requests housing assistance from 211, they're going to run along the upper trajectory on the screen. And so they call 211, they're asking for housing assistance. 211 for York County does a very brief triage tool. It's asking about predominantly like immediate needs. Are you looking for shelter needs? Are you looking for street outreach needs? Are you in a situation where your safety is compromised so that we can make sure that those situations are handled first and foremost? But as part of that triage, they also ask if you'd be comfortable having someone call you back or email you back in order to have an assessment completed. We have the Bell Next Door program call our triages from 211 back or email, whatever the best contact is for them, in order to complete that assessment. So the burden doesn't fall to the client, it falls to us to be able to reach out and ask them if they would like to pursue that. If they say no, they don't want someone to contact them, they do still get the information for Bell Next Door, and they're told in order to access, some permanent options in York County, you'll need to talk to this agency, and then they can make the call themselves if they don't want someone to reach out to them. So once they get to Bell Next Door as a triage, they complete the full VI SPDAT with Bell, and then they become part of our single wait list for housing options. If someone goes to a housing agency in York County that is trained to do coordinated entry, and I apologize, I need to update my list a little bit on the left, we'll talk about it, then they don't do the triage. They do that kind of stuff. They make sure they're safe. They make sure they have access to shelter options or street outreach, but they are doing the full Pathways to Home assessment with them. Those are typically entered in HMIS. For the YWCA in Hanover, you guys will have paper packets that you will complete and submit to me. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then they become part of our single wait list, and we review Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. Who's taking referrals. That piece of the call will probably fall to Sarah or Amy to be a part of. It won't necessarily fall to all of the advocates doing the assessments. So on those calls, we make referrals to programs that have openings. And so there is a little bit of case conferencing involved there. If someone has familiarity with a household that's getting a referral, there's some sharing of information and discussion. Sometimes it's just a straight referral, but we do that together as a group to make sure that we're aware of who's working with who. Once a referral is made to an agency, it becomes the onus of that agency, of that program, to reach out to that client and confirm that they are eligible and confirm that they are interested in working with that project. If the client is both interested and eligible, then the program moves forward with enrollment and starts their process of looking for housing. If the client is not eligible, they are explained that they're not eligible for the program that they're being called for. But they will still be eligible for other programs. And usually then we ask for an update on their housing status or whatever that might be. For domestic violence, most of the people that you are going to get as referrals are going to be eligible, because it's less about where they're currently living and more about getting them out of their domestic violence situation. For some of our other projects, it is very much about where they're currently living, and so their eligibility may be more likely to change than a domestic violence household. If someone's housing status is changed, not DV, then we may recommend other things in the community they may be eligible for, but can't serve them through our process because their housing status has changed. If they decline the program, for some reason they don't want to work with that particular program, it's the program's responsibility to notify me, and then I am able to put them back on the list and they are eligible for other resources. So typically, if a program can't move forward with a client, I ask for an update on why, so that I can decide what the next appropriate course of action is for that household. Yeah, and then that's kind of how we handle the chain. As far as agencies that do assessments in the community, Bell Next Door program is our primary assessor. They will do assessments by phone, they will do assessments in person, and they are typically who does the bulk of our assessments. The Bell Family Shelter does do assessments on people that are currently staying at Bell Family Shelter. The Bell Supported Housing Program does a few assessments as well. They have scattered site permanent housing that they connect with folks with mental health concerns predominantly. Covenant House is not currently doing assessments because of staffing capacity. We're all kind of struggling with that a little bit right now, and so they're just on pause. However, Valley Youth House, as another youth provider in our community, has been doing the bulk of their assessments for them. Friends and Neighbors does our street outreach in York County, all of York County, and they will do assessments as well. Mason-Dixon is currently paused, staffing changes. New Hope is currently paused because their housing advocates are very busy right now. The program It's About Change does housing assessments as well. Turning Point Interfaith Mission, I know, is actually in Adams County, but they have they have programs in York. So they also are on that list as well. Valley Youth House is doing a lot of assessments. If you're familiar with kind of York metro area, they do them at their offices. They also do them at the Beacon Day Shelter, which is a resource center that's open in one of our churches in York City, 4 afternoons a week. They are there as well doing assessments. They are also going to be, and I can't remember the date, I'll make sure I share it, at the Guthrie Library in Hanover, like once or twice a month to capture some folks that are utilizing the library as a safe space while they're experiencing homelessness. And they also are doing some assessments in Red Lion at the 18 South Youth Center. So they're expanding and trying to cover a few extra places as well. So there is someone else doing some assessments in Hanover a few times a month at least. But that's for all populations. York Adams Health Choices Management Unit does also do some assessments. As far as agencies that receive housing referrals, the Bell Next Door program is probably our largest source of rapid rehousing in York County. And so they get a large number of referrals for a lot of programs. They actually operate 2 domestic violence dedicated projects. So they do not only a lot of domestic violence assessments, they also work with a lot of domestic violence households. So you may end up working with them more closely than you would anticipate, because they're not a victim service provider, but they have stepped in and they do a lot of that housing. There are a couple of permanent supportive housing options as well. One run through Bell, one run through Turning Point that take referrals. Valley Youth House does 18 to 24-year-olds, whether they're unaccompanied or whether they have families of their own. They also take housing referrals here in the community, and we have a permanent supportive housing program that is a partnership with Health Choices and the Housing Authority, actually. And they also take some referrals as well. So you guys will kind of be added to that list when I do my updates, as not only a referral, not only as an assessment source, but also as a referral for housing projects. That's a lot. You'll see my contact information is listed on the bottom of this screen. It's also later on. Once I see that people have reviewed the recording of this training, I will send paper materials out, and then you'll have all of my email information. You'll be able to contact me directly. Okay. Some of these are going to be a little different because you guys are a victim service provider, and because you are my first victim service provider doing assessments, we are all kind of learning together. So there is the YWCA of Hanover has like an informed consent form, and you guys are still going to be doing that informed consent form. I think you do it in Adams County as well. And but you'll also have a coordinated entry form for York County. And the biggest reason for that is we're going to use that York County consent form to determine which of the paper assessments you provide we can enter into our HMIS, where we track our coordinated entry wait list with identifying information and those that don't want their identifying information included. So there will be, I think it's just 1 page front and back that will be included in the packet that you will complete when you're doing an assessment with someone. You guys will not kind of do some of these things listed here because you will not have access to HMIS. You will be recording the information listed here on paper forms and then submitting them to me. So you will do informed consent for the YW. You will do the pathways to home release of information. You will do a packet. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. You'll do a packet that will include what we call the best fit housing survey. It's our opportunity to ask additional questions of the household outside of the BI SPDAT. And then it also includes the BI SPDAT. And then that whole packet will be submitted to us. I will defer to the YW on how you prefer to do that. I will obviously accept it via fax if that is something that feels more secure for the population that you are working with. But I will also accept it scanned via secure email if that works better for you guys as an agency. But those will probably be the two ways that you'll submit those to me. And we will always confirm that we received it and that everything was complete and that we were good to go. So we talked a little bit about this. The workflow is my sheet with the little guy on it that tells you how to navigate the system. There is a consent form that I will share with you. Excuse me. There is what we call prioritization and referral committee. P&R is what we call it. That is a confidentiality agreement that people joining our once a week phone call for referrals will have to sign, just so that information shared during that call is confidential to that call. And I will be sending that to Amy and Sarah. And if they need anyone else to sign it, they will have them signed. You'll also have the VI SPDAT for singles. That should be completed for anyone who is a single adult on their own. And then a VI SPDAT for families. I tell everyone, don't read too much into that family's name. It's really anybody that's in a household together that's looking for housing together, regardless of any kind of relationship to one another. A couple of things to remember about our York County process. When you complete a housing assessment, it's going to be good for 60 days. I look through the list every 30 days and remove people who've been on the list for more than 60 days. And then an email actually goes out indicating the people that have been removed. If it's someone that has not disclosed their name and information and you guys are the assessor, I will share that with you privately that I've removed them from the list, because we clean every 60 days. And because we can't necessarily always keep track of who's still working with our victim service providers, at that point, someone can have a new assessment. They can be re-added to the list, but that list does have to be cleaned out every 60 days. We always tell everyone, and they're doing assessments, to make sure people understand that we cannot guarantee housing because you had the housing assessment. Once upon a time, I probably said we almost could guarantee a housing referral. But right now that's not the case. We're definitely operating a pretty lengthy wait list right now. So we always want to make sure that they do complete these assessments, because it does get them on the list they need to be on to have an opportunity to get housing. But we can't guarantee that it will be the way they get housing. So we always encourage everyone to make sure that they are exploring every other housing possibility they can while they're also on our list to try to get assistance. All right, so I'm going to skip the HMIS screens because they won't apply to you guys. But I want to just draw a little bit of attention to kind of like our qualifications for assessment. I anticipate that most of the assessments you complete will be on domestic violence households. In the off chance that you are doing an assessment on someone who is not domestic violence, then I just want you to be aware that for York County right now, we're just asking you to do assessments for those that are literally homeless. We are not asking you to do homeless prevention assessments right now. We do have a homeless prevention assessment in York County. It was postponed a little bit during COVID and is kind of slowly coming back. But the reality is there are very few prevention assistance funds in York County. And so we have to balance kind of how we're handling those assessments, because we know the need exponentially exceeds what we actually have available for prevention. Those things are really only going to be applicable to you if you are doing assessments on someone who is not a domestic violence household, because we know domestic violence households are eligible regardless of kind of where they're staying. But in the chance that you're not doing them on that population, we want to make sure that you're focusing on populations that are living in a place not meant for habitation. They're in an emergency shelter, or far less likely is number 3, which is the exiting the institution after a stay of less than 90 days, and they were homeless before they went in. We almost never can catch anybody in that number 3 criteria. It's very challenging, but these are the populations that we will typically assess outside of domestic violence, in which case we assess no matter where they're staying and no matter how their housing situation changes, as long as they're still trying to get away from that particular situation. Okay, so our steps within our packet are the same steps that are within the HMIS. So these are still relevant to all of you. The client contact information, we need to know how to contact people in case we have referrals for them. We need our best fit housing survey, and we need a VI SPDAT. So those are the only things we really need in addition to the consent forms that we talked about previously. All right, so I am going to get rid of this, and I am going to switch over to some of our documents, because that's the way that you guys are going to be seeing them. So let me pull these over to the correct screen, and we'll talk through these really briefly, and then we'll see how it goes. Once you've viewed this information, not only will I share the forms with you, but there are also a couple of policy and procedure, standard operating procedure style documents, manuals for coordinated entry. And so you will also get those as well. I encourage you to look through them and kind of make sure you're aware of the information that's in them. Okay, so our forms look like, we'll do these ones first. Actually, maybe I'll just share my screen and we'll switch to that. Okay. So, as I mentioned before, the YWCA Safe Home has this informed consent form. This is one that you guys use in Adams County, but having read through it, I don't see any reason why it isn't relevant to York. And so I think in this one instance, we're always excited when we can reuse a form for the same purpose. I think in this instance, we can use this form in York County as well. So you will complete this form. You will also complete, let me hop over because this is a Word document, what we call our coordinated entry assessment screening form. This will have, you guys are on here, see? YWCA Safe Home. So you guys are on here. This is talking about the information that's going to be collected from you, and whether or not you are comfortable having your identifying information shared with your assessment, or if you would prefer to have that information be anonymous with your assessment. So you guys will complete this. You'll see there's a place for signature. It is a front and back. And then you will also complete a VI SPDAT. So the VI SPDATs for families and singles, if you have any familiarity with them, they're really the same document. The difference is how the questions are asked. On the families document, the questions are asked in a way that reminds the person you're interviewing to consider their response for everybody in their household. So on the family VI SPDAT, they talk about, do you or anyone else in your household have any legal stuff going on right now? Whereas the single VI SPDAT talks more about, do you, as the only person in the household, have any legal stuff going on right now? So it's really just how the questions are worded, but they do have the same content. We have included a little script. You don't have to use it. If you have things you already do as part of your assessment process, you can use your own terminology, but there is a little script there. There is obviously the full VI SPDAT listed here. I'm going to scroll down to show you the bottom. Make everybody a little seasick. At the bottom, there is also this kind of best fit housing survey questionnaire. These are our local questions. These are the questions we ask in order to better refer to programming. Something you will see on here is whether or not someone is interested in housing assistance in the Hanover area. And we are going to probably initially only ask that for domestic violence households, since the YW program is the only program dedicated to the Hanover area that's coming through coordinated entry. but that will be on here, and it will be on here for all of the other assessors who do things in HMIS as well, so that they can be asking. But yeah, these are just our local questions. Something I do want to draw attention to is that we do ask some questions about prior housing, and we ask some questions about criminal history. We just want to make it really clear to everybody that we're not asking these questions because we're going to limit your opportunities to access housing. We actually have programs that work with reentrants from jail or prison time. And so we have to ask if you have had that jail or prison time in order to know whether you're eligible for that program. And then we do ask about rental history, not because we're not going to work with a household, but because we're just kind of curious what your previous rental experiences have been and whether or not you have things within your household that are going to require more creative solutions to housing. Some of these things are previous criminal history that might limit what you're eligible for, such as certain drug offenses, arson. If you are on Megan's list, for example, we're going to have to get a little bit more creative about where we're looking for housing for you. And so that's why we ask this. They are not punitive in any way, and we will not use them in that way. It's just for us to know what your current housing challenges are and what things you have that we might need to take a different look at and when we're looking for housing. So you guys will, as I mentioned, do the YW form, do our coordinated entry form, you'll do a VI SPDAT, and then you'll submit those packets. Those packets, as I said before, can be submitted via fax. I will share my fax information. It's in my signature line and my email, so you'll have it. You can also submit them via email through a secure email portal. I'm positive you guys have that. Is that true, Amy? Yeah. So you can also submit them electronically scanned through that portal. I'm fine with that as well. And they will go on our list, and we will navigate how we're going to make referrals, and we'll navigate connections. I will tell you our policies and procedures for domestic violence households, especially where the domestic violence household is anonymous on our list, indicates that either our agency, the York County Coalition on Homelessness, who is the coordinated entry manager in York County, or the assessment agency will reach out to those anonymous clients if a referral is made to another agency. So if they are referred to a housing program that's not within the agency that did their assessment, there is an extra step built in where either the coordinated entry manager or the assessment agency will reach out to that person and say, I have a potential housing opportunity for you. It is with a different agency than the one you completed your assessment with. This is the agency, and this is the person who would be reaching out. Are you okay with me sharing your name and your contact information with that agency? So there's an extra step built in just to make sure that they're comfortable having that, so that we're not cold calling people who thought their information was secure. But again, that's typically on our folks that say that they just want to remain anonymous. If someone is willing to disclose their information on our list, that referral source will probably just reach out directly. Okay, questions from Amy, since you're my live and in person for our recording. Okay. So I mentioned,
me.
yeah, I mentioned at the beginning, you guys are our first victim service provider doing assessments. And so I want to be really clear to anyone who watches the recording, none of this is set in stone. If we start doing this and it doesn't feel right, or if we feel like something is missing, or if we feel like we need to make a change, I want to hear that. I want to hear what we can do to streamline it for you guys. So that can come from anyone. It doesn't just have to come from Amy. It doesn't just have to come from Sarah. It can come from anyone. As you're doing the assessments, you're like, I feel like we should do something a little different here. I'm open to that so that we can make this work in the way that works best for you guys. Our other victim service provider in York County is the YWCA York. And they have Bell Next Door completing their assessments for them. Partially because they are partners on a domestic violence program. But that's why you guys are my first, because Belle has been handling that assessment piece for the folks working with my other victim service provider. So I'm comfortable sharing what you guys are comfortable sharing. I am completely willing to lock down what we feel like is not meeting the needs of clients in this particular situation, or what's not meeting the needs of your requirements as a victim service provider agency. So please be open with me about what works and what doesn't. We have also notified the other assessment agencies and the other referral agencies that you guys are coming on board and that you guys will be doing some assessments, but that it will look different. It will not necessarily be an HMIS the same way that they are used to seeing each other's assessments. And they're all aware of that. They've had enough domestic violence training at this point to understand why that is. But we'll navigate like what that looks like as far as communication goes. I know that some of our providers have had a lot of success doing shared releases between like the YW in York and their agency whenever they do share a client. And so you guys may see some of that request and be going back to your clients to ask if they're comfortable with that so that you can work with some of our other housing providers as well. So we're all going to jump in. That's going to be enough to jump in. As I mentioned, this will be a recording available to all the other advocates at the YW to review. When you go to review it, the video will be within the Zoom platform that you go to view it. Hopefully, then everybody can access it. I won't stick it on YouTube where sometimes things are blocked. You will be asked to register with your name and your email when you go to watch that video, and that is so that I can send you all the information from the video. So just be aware of that, and then you can also reach out to me too if you prefer to reach out and say, hey, I watched the video, I have questions, or hey, I watched the video, I'm ready for the materials. That is completely fine. So I think I had it up on my PowerPoint, but I will make sure I share the chat when I share this video, and I will put my email address and my name in the chat, and then everybody will have access to it when they watch the video as well. Okay. Thank you for your help. Thank you for being my captive audience today, Amy. Appreciate that. And I will get materials out to you since you have completed this, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
Right. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.